So, PR secrets for startups. I guess let's start off the series by just talking a little bit about what is PR and why is it important for startups. So just to clarify, we have two journalists, sort of, and two startups represented on our panel here. So I'll let everyone do a brief introduction as we walk down the panel, but if you could say from your perspective, what do you think PR is and why is it important for the tech startup community? And we'll start with Jason Kincaid from TechCrunch.
I'm Jason Kincaid from TechCrunch. What PR is, I mean, from my perspective, it's outreach, trying to get attention for your startup, ensuring that you're conveying the right messages, the letting everyone know when you've got a feature coming out, and also, not letting everything go to hell when something goes wrong. So I think that's a succinct way to put it.
I'm Vince Salito from Yelp, and in my view, public relations or PR is communicating the company's message to the public. Usually it's an attempt to drive a positive message, but sometimes it's also designed to defend against negative messages from either the media or your competitors or perhaps of your own doing. But it's basically just communicating with the public in an effort to reach your customers or key influencers.
So I think PR is building the hype machine. So differentiating yourself from your competitors, building relationships with the media, with the press, and PR gives you a sounding board to help hone your message and really help crystallize the brand that you're trying to go out there in the market with. So, and you get direct and almost immediate feedback on that.
Hi, I'm Martin Giles from The Economist newspaper. I agree with everything that my fellow panelists have said. I would say, for me, PR, it's either appalling spam, of which there is a great deal, and I can talk a little bit more about that later on, or it's excellent, which is unfortunately not common enough. And when I say excellent, what it is really understanding, making the effort to understand the publication or the website that you're targeting, making sure your message is tailored to that website, that publication and its audience, and thirdly, making sure you're differentiated and you've taken the time to really work on your differentiation from everything else that's out there, because there's a lot of it.
So I think, yeah, you can do that. One of the things I think that has changed quite a bit in the last 4 or 5 years is the growth of online PR or blogging and other various channels. And I wonder, Stu, I know I actually did a little bit of work at Mint, but Stu did most of the customer acquisition and a lot of the PR efforts also. How has that changed, particularly maybe even in just the last 12 to 18 months, when you're thinking about doing PR to both traditional press, that's print press, versus online, versus maybe not even doing online stuff with journalism, but actually just using social media channels to get your own message out. How do you think about where to spend your time and effort, and what percentage goes to offline versus online versus in-house?
So I think marquee media still has a lot of power, and so the New York Times and the Wall Street Journals, the LA Times, The Economist, some of the old school publications.
Oh, dear, oh dear.
I love The Economist, by the way. So I'd say that you got to look at who's really the tier A, and who are really the people that can really move the needle in your business. And so you need to identify who the key players are, who the key journalists are, who the decision makers are.
Let's dive into that. So
okay.
If you had a choice between the New York Times and TechCrunch, what would be your choice if you had to give an exclusive or give some other type of PR information?
New York Times or TechCrunch?
New York Times or TechCrunch? Isn't that a relevant choice?
If I say if you're raising money, TechCrunch. I say raising money, TechCrunch. If you're looking to acquire customers, I lean towards the New York Times.
Really?
I would, and just because depending on the placement of the New York Times, if the New York Times gives you the proper placement or even let's say a Yahoo gives you proper placement, then you'll drive 10, 20, 30x the volume of users. And because they're such credible sources, the conversion rate on those that we've saw were 25, 35, 40% conversion rate from those sources. Now, I'm not saying that TechCrunch didn't play a big part, and Mashable play a big part, but the audiences just are not the order of magnitude. So that's why there's a few key marquee tier 1 publications you need to go after, but you can't spend all your time doing that, because it's like business development and going after the big elephant, right? Business development, right? I think you have to take a portion of your time and try to go after that. Pick an agency that has existing relationships, possibly if you can afford it. But the majority of your time as a startup should be spent on content development, building your own blog, mastering social media, because I think one of the things that's really changed in the last 24 months is social media has in some ways become more powerful than traditional PR. And a lot of times what we saw that the tail was wagging the dog. So we saw that things would become popular in social media for us first with our own content that we produced, or our own product announcements that we put out, our own press releases. We would promote that in social media. And then traditional media would pick it up. So that's how we got relationships with some of the New York Times, and that's how we get relationships with some of folks such as The Economist. So, for example, one of the things is our infographics. And we're actually starting to we have a partnership that we're just going to launch with The Economist on our infographics. And no.
I actually didn't know about it.
No, so we just started to. We just ran into them the past couple of weeks. And they've seen our infographics run on CNN and Huffington Post and on TechCrunch and on Mashable and so on and so forth. And finally they've come out, they approached us and said, I want you to develop some stuff for our site.
Vince, so you're also representing a startup. Do you agree with TechCrunch for funding and larger print media for anything else?
I think the point, not for now, that's for sure. No, I think that the point there really is that the outlet you choose really depends on both the message and the desired audience. And are you trying to reach consumers or influencers? And what are you trying to achieve? And there are clearly parts of the media that can help set tone, can help set agendas, can provide credibility, which then aid your ability to then get the consumer press. And then there is the purely consumer-oriented press that drives the numbers and drives your traffic. So it depends on your message and your goal. And so I think it's really what you're talking about is market. In a sense, it's market segmentation, but on the PR side. So yeah, I totally agree with that comment.
So Jason, obviously you're useful only for fundraising, and that's about it for most startups. Is there any reason I should really come to you other than once a year when I'm trying to raise money from venture capitalists? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I do think it's wholly dependent on what your story is. I think that at TechCrunch, we write about a lot of this stuff all the time, and we may actually know some of this better than some of the other mainstream outlets as far as features you previously launched, what this impact could be for your company. I could see you going to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal for your initial launch and kind of giving like an overall summary, although you should launch with TechCrunch first. But I'm not going to deny there's some value to that. I should point out, you're probably not going to have a choice between like TechCrunch and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. It's really hard to get covered by have a choice lined up. So your best bet is to reach out to us first. And then if you don't hear back, then definitely reach out to other outlets like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal.
I think Martin would like to respond.
Yeah, I do think it is horses for courses, but the mainstream old media still has some life left in it, and occasionally we can create a resonance very early on that perhaps even a TechCrunch, which does a wonderful job of many things, can't. So I think we're still in it.
That's true. I'm not saying they aren't at all.
So I think Stu brought this up a little bit already about the growth of Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and just the ability to produce your own press and media in a lot of cases. What advice do you guys have for startups who are just getting off the ground in how they put together their own in-house media efforts. Do you think it's valuable to go out and hire a PR firm, or do you think it's just better to try and hire somebody internally to work with your company? Vince, I guess, do you have any sense? Do you guys have an in-house blogger or other people doing social media on your side?
So I come from the school of trying to minimize outside agency involvement as much as possible. So I'll take sort of two parts. One, I do think that the rise of social media has dramatically transformed the PR industry, but I think it's also given so many more tools and opportunities and options to small startups, because you really can create all your own content. You get your blog going, and you just populate that with your own content, announcements, photos, profiles of the company. Plus, you can do it in ways that are both newsy and about your product, or that are just purely about the people in your company, just to continue to drive recognition. Then you go ahead and set up a Facebook page. You can just do Twitter nonstop of all those things that you're doing. You're building up content that's helping with SEO. You'd be shocked how many semi-official bloggers or aspiring journalists will go ahead and repost your content verbatim. And as a result, you'll find other people publishing your content unchanged, giving it an air of legitimacy that perhaps it well deserves, I'm sure. But anyway, you can publish your own content and disseminate it throughout the web, and it builds brand recognition and buzz and SEO. We certainly use our blog as our primary communications vehicle for all sectors of our audience. We use our blog to communicate with the media, to communicate with our customers, to communicate with new potential customers, period.
Do you think startup CEOs should be bloggers?
I think in your very early stages, you probably have so few employees, you don't have a PR person, you don't have a marketing person. The CEO is inherently that person, so that person needs to. Plus, as the founder, they know the story best. I think eventually, we set a goal of trying to have a handful of blog entries per week. One a day is almost a little ambitious for us, but we're a small, lean operation.
I've seen Jeremy weigh in when occasionally there's been a high-profile negative news story. I don't know that I see him weigh in as much when there's more of a positive story to tell. But do you have any house rules for founders can or can't produce their own social media without talking to a PR? What's sort of your?
Are you asking me, do I require the CEO ask my permission before he posts or blogs? Yes, I require it. That's sort of why I'm supposed to be there, but it's always a challenge.
I guess I should mention Vince and I are all friends, having worked together at PayPal, where he had much more interesting sorts of PR to deal with at that time. I guess actually that's an interesting story. We were talking about this before. So what happens when you approach a journalist or a blogger or something, and either they don't write a story or they write a negative story? How should you be responding to that situation? Yeah, well, actually, let's. So, Jason, what do you think if you write a negative story about a company? What's their best response to your negative story on them? Shut up! Don't say a word.
No, I think it's in your best interest to probably go to your own company blog and say, this is where we messed up, or this is where we didn't mess up, although we're always right. So it's probably this is how we messed up. In any case, there are probably some instances where there are like legal ramifications for speaking about a lawsuit or something where you can't say anything. But in an event where there's something you can say, I think it's probably a good move to just sort of, if you don't say anything, it's going to snowball out of control, or at least there's a chance it will. So it's probably best to address it as soon as you can.
Do you guys agree that you should respond to negative press?
I think if it's negative product press, then I think you definitely should respond if you plan on improving it. And we've responded actually on TechCrunch or on a blog, directly on the blog in the comments, if it's something related to the product, and we say, okay, there's a fix coming for that. I think in generally, if people just don't like the company, then I think maybe there's not a need for immediate responding on the site. Maybe just, again, let it go a little bit if it's negative overall in general. And in terms of where the source is from.
Have you ever prepared a defense for a negative story that hasn't come out Vince is nodding his head. I know the answer is yes.
Have I prepared one?
Yeah.
No, I write.
Well, I mean, it's pragmatic. It's good. I mean, you know where all the bodies are buried.
This is the past, right? Nothing Yelp that you prepared
I've done communications for 20 years in politics and in technology, and in both industries there are a lot of bad stories, and it's completely pragmatic to, you know where all the scandals are, you know where all the problems are, you know where all the pitfalls are, and particularly nowadays, it's virtually guaranteed that they're all going to come out. And if you know they're going to come out and you know what they are, then the strategy is to figure out, how are we going to handle this? Are we going to preemptively leak it? Are we going to try and maximize dissemination during a slow period in order to prevent, further echoing of it? Or how are we going to position it? Do we attempt to, kind of anneal it, kind of just burn it all off early before it can blow? And there are a lot of strategies, but yeah, you definitely prepare defensive PR strategies for things you know are very likely to happen.
So, Martin, I want to address this one. Have you ever written a negative story about someone where they called you up and said, "What the hell are you doing? That was like really unfair or negative"? Or, like, what's generally your interaction with someone after you've written a negative story?
I've written a fair few in my time, yes, and I think it really depends on the situation. And I think for PR practitioners and marketers in the audience, you have to judge, as Vince said, what is the resonance of this story. Is there something incorrect in it? First of all, if there's an error, clearly that you should address that. And some critical stories have errors in them. Mine, very rarely, I'm happy to say, but it can happen, and then it's up to the publication or the website to correct that. I think if you feel very strongly that it's painted an incredibly negative picture and unfair, the best way to respond to that is either on your blog or both on your blog and in a letter or in a formal response to the publication of the website. That if they're a respectable website or publication, they should print that response. It's a right of reply. But beyond that, I think people who throw toys out of the pram, that says to the journalist, great, there's even more of a story here than I thought in the first place. Better keep digging.
I guess the other question I was going to ask about this is, can you earn points in a negative situation by engaging with the journalist, or is there ways that you feel? Jason, have you had someone like call you on a story and say, that's bullshit, or I disagree with that story, and then as a result of that build a relationship?
Have them call me and say that what I wrote is wrong, and then build a relationship? Okay. So I'd like to think that there's nothing you can do to skew my judgment, but based on forming a relationship. But in reality, if you preemptively reach out to the press about something that you know is going to hit and it's negative, it's probably not going to be as bad as it would if they discovered it on their own. If you've got a journalist digging and they've found this golden nugget of negative news, that it feels more substantial than if you've got this document saying hey, this is going to come out, it's pretty bad for us, this is our response. You get in front of the negative press. So I mean, if I was a startup and something bad was going to happen, I would probably reach out to someone who knew my company and hope that they didn't tear me apart.
You might put that on your own blog first and try and drive the traffic to your blog rather than
I was going to say, I slightly disagree with that, because I think anyone who reaches out to me with some negative news, I'm going to take that very quickly, and maybe it gets spread around faster, perhaps. So again, you have to work out just how bad is this. Is a sort of preemptive strike really going to sort of keep the lid on this, or is it going to blow up even bigger and even faster than it would do if someone takes another 4 months to find it? So you've got to make that judgment.
So we didn't quite dive into this before, but I wanted to sort of talk a little bit more about, a lot of startups think that the two times that I want to interact with TechCrunch are basically when I'm trying to raise financing or when I'm going to launch. I just think that's, from my perspective, launch is not a singular point in time. There's a continuous kind of relationship between the press and every product release and feature release that you come out with. But any tips that you have for, new startups or new founders, how do you get that initial coverage going, and what should you be doing to try and establish relationships, with bloggers or with print journalists about how to get that off the ground?
I can start, I think.
What kind of beer and chocolate do you like, Jason?
I should say, people send us random stuff all the time, and it really doesn't help or doesn't really skew anything either way. In terms of getting initial coverage, I do think the launch event is good for press because it's something that's easy for us to understand. It's like this wasn't available before, and now it is. And that's why I think that a lot of people focus on that, and I think it's still a good idea. Even if you are doing sort of an iterative launching feature by feature, just the first time you're publicly available, I'd say that's the first time you should be reaching out to press, or maybe do a private beta beforehand. After that, the best way to have a sustained relationship with the press is not to tell them about every single little feature you launch, because then they'll grow sort of blind to those inbound emails that they get in their inbox every week. It's better to package up these little things into one nice bundle of really cool stuff, and you sort of explain how this changes everything and how this makes you different from everything else already out there.
I just say also that you have to be mindful of what the story is. If you're coming out with a story and it's just, okay, we have a great new product or feature in the product that's going to drive more leads, it's going to make us more money, the press is not going to feel so interested in that. But if you bundle it up with, well, we're also going to be a consumer advocate, where there's a component of financial literacy, or there's a component of some kind of goodwill, altruistic tied into that, and you put that, as Jason was saying, into a feature, and then give the press early access to that. So you can give people an early look of it, and then you can also decide, you have preferential treatment on who's going to be able to run the exclusive. So that's what you have each time. So you have a launch, but to your point, Dave, you do have multiple launches. You do have the opportunity to give someone an exclusive each time. And you also have the opportunity, too, as a beta launch, too. So you can actually give influencers within the community the ability to early exposure and early access to the beta, and that a lot of times gets more interest coming from the press too.
Quick. You guys are kind of a big goal target for people that want to get product launching at any kind of coverage. What's the best way to approach you on a story, and what kind of stories are you interested in covering?
The first thing is not to do is sort of spray and pray, as I call it, which is just like sort of mass email out, and I get this email, and it's clearly one that's gone to 1,000 other journalists. For me, at The Economist, that's not of interest, so I'll immediately screen that out. What makes sense is to understand who my readers are, what my audience is, just as what your audiences are. You need to understand who your customers are. I need to understand who my customers are. If you come to me and have clearly understood who the Economist audience is, and you've communicated that to me in various different ways, then that's going to get my attention. And it's remarkably rare. I think you should approach me as you would a venture capitalist. Imagine you're trying to get funding from me, money out of me, because I don't like giving money to anybody. I don't like giving column space to anybody. So persuade me as you would a venture capitalist why this really is different. What's the market? What's the trend? What's the size? Who are the players? What's the team? Why, Martin, is this the one that you should write about in any given week? Because I could write about thousands, literally, almost every week.
So this one is one that I think we've talked a little bit about, but maybe not as much as I'd like to. So do you hire a PR firm or not? And if you hire a PR firm, how should you go about that process? You're hiring an individual, you're hiring, sort of the name brand firm that got a whole bunch of press for some other company. What kind of budget should we be thinking about? And maybe I'll start with Jason and say, are you generally interested when you hear from a PR firm positively, negatively, or neutrally?
So,
be honest.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to be. I have nothing against PR firms. If you have a PR firm, I don't hold it against you. And I do know some people in PR, like I've worked with them before, so that's good. Most of them I haven't, and it really just doesn't make a big difference. I'd say the best time to hire a PR firm, I don't really know how to say this in a really nice way. If you don't have the social skills to be on a call with someone and you can't tell when they're no longer interested in what you're talking about, then you should probably get someone in PR on that line with you. Like, that's being brutally honest. The thing with PR and firms especially, they can create kind of a barrier between what the journalist is looking to get and the information itself. And in some cases, that's a good thing when there's something bad happening. But sometimes it's just really frustrating. You know, I want to know some basic stat, and it's easier just to connect with the founder. So I guess if you do have a PR firm, just to leave that alternate channel open, even if the firm tells you not to. I don't know.
And they will. I try to avoid hiring PR firms as much as I can. We don't have one at Yelp for domestic communications. I've recently hired a firm for our international, our European expansion, only because I don't speak those languages. And so it's very difficult for me to communicate with the reporters over there, let alone know exactly who the right ones are. So we have a firm handling our European outreach, but we handle all of our PR internally at Yelp. As small staff, a handful of people. Why? Two main reasons. One, I like to think that the people that are doing PR for me are single-mindedly focused on the company, that all they want to do is promote our company, our message, plus that gives them the time to really understand the business, the model, the product, get to know the personalities of the key spokespeople. There are a lot of nuances to good PR, and frankly, it's like anything, right? Selling, what's PR? PR is selling without the commission. And so how do you sell well? Understand. How do you sell well? Confidence. How are you confident? When you know your shit. And so if you're going to be a good PR person, you have to have the confidence that comes from knowing your product, knowing your business, knowing your space, knowing your competitors, knowing your spokespeople. And I think you only get that when you're immersed in the business. The other reason is that PR firms are extraordinarily expensive. And you're going to be paying I remember in the old days you were paying $20K a month retainers. And maybe you can get away for $10K a month retainers now. But what are you doing? Well, you're blowing a lot of that on overhead. You're not getting one person. You're getting a team of 5, which means you get the lowest paid person who's going to basically answer your calls and do your clips and take the initial phone call from Jason. And then the other half of your budget is going to get blown when the account executive basically comes in and says, okay, what does Jason want? And then you figure out what to do. So, I mean, that is why I try not to use PR firms, because they're extremely expensive. I think it's more difficult for them to really understand the product and have the confidence to do a good job. And I do think it can put up that barrier that Jason talked about, where not only is there miscommunication or perhaps misunderstanding or mistrust, but it's also just a barrier. And it also can slow things down. And in today's environment where you get an email from TechCrunch and you have 15 minutes to respond, or else it's up there live and, oh, don't worry, we'll update later. You got to move quickly.
What's your top 3 tips for people that are trying to figure out their PR resource strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I agree with that. They're expensive, so really be mindful of the budget. And you are probably going to get the low man on the totem pole unless you have some special relationship at the agency. So be mindful of that as well. Keep on top of your PR firm. If you can, try to do a tiered incentive. So try to pay them a base and then pay them performance on top of either traffic they bring to the site or coverage that you can actually show results for. So if you can negotiate that, I think that's a huge win. I've done that before. I'd say that, again, I would go after a PR firm for the contacts with the Tier 1 media. That's what they're most valuable for. That's where the real value is. I think essentially you're better off spending your time on social media and hiring some people that are very savvy in social media to be an extension of your marketing team. Not an extension of your brand, of your PR team, an extension of your marketing team. And so my marketing team, my marketing team, my social team, my PR team all work very closely together. We all attend the same meetings. It's all essentially one team. But for a startup, I would say that a launch is very important, and a PR agency can help you really nail the launch. Getting that Tier 1 media, they can help you nail that. But for everything else, I would say go after and get a strong social team before and be able to push your own content and before you go out and get a PR agency.
Probably not. And on the whole, I would say it's really, like you said, it's commission without selling. I think it's selling without commission. I think it's selling with commission. Often when I have contact from a PR company, it's clear that they really want me to write about something, so they can tick the box that says Tier 1 Media or The Economist. I got them, and it feels like that. It feels false. Now, not all the time. There are some extremely good PR companies who've listened to some of the things I said earlier, obviously, or have learnt from the past, and have taken that and approached me in the right way, but it's pretty rare. And I think that having your own experienced people in-house who can tell that story with a passion that's genuine, and in my mind there's a sort of, it's not commission, they really believe this, that's important to me. But I also think that social media, it is, if I was starting a company tomorrow, I definitely would go in the way these two gentlemen have said, and build that presence in the echo chamber, because it's true. I listen to the echo chamber, and I think tier one media increasingly are involved in the echo chamber, not as much as my colleague down the end here, who's doing an exceptionally good job at building some noise in that echo chamber, but it is very important, and if I was starting, that's where I put my money.